The bell rang at 12:03, sharp as always. At Maple Ridge Elementary, recess was sacred. Third graders shot out the doors like someone had fired a starting gun. Laughter spilled across the blacktop, mixing with the squeak of sneakers and the clatter of swings. It was a perfect spring day in Greenwood, Missouri. Blue sky, trimmed grass, and no hint of what was about to unravel. Ms. Carla Bennett, supervising lunch recess, leaned against the chain-link fence, nursing a lukewarm coffee and scanning the playground. Her eyes swept left to right. Habit, not fear. No one feared anything here. This was a quiet town. Crime happened on TV, not in the middle of a schoolyard surrounded by oak trees and soccer moms. She waved at one of the aides walking past with a bandaged knee kid. Then something caught her attention. Not a noise, but a sudden absence of one. The quiet came fast. No more giggles from the far field. Carla stood straighter. "Carly?" she called toward the grassy area near the back fence. No answer. She turned to where 3 girls had been moments ago, Carly Freeman, Mia Delgado, and Tasha Lorne. They had been playing their usual game near the trees. Now, nothing. Her coffee slipped from her hand and hit the ground with a dull thud. She started walking, then jogging, toward the last spot she remembered them. Her pulse climbed with every step. The grass was slightly trampled. A single pink sneaker lay sideways by the tree stump, its Velcro strap still open. Carla knelt. "Girls." Her voice cracked. Behind her a soft whimper rose, not from a child, from a dog. A bark rang out, not nearby, not on school grounds, distant, muffled. Then a silence so deep it pushed against her ears. She looked toward the fence line beyond the field, where thick woods began. "Someone call the office," she shouted. "Now." By 12:17, lockdown procedures were underway. Parents began arriving in waves, some in pajamas, others barefoot, tears already streaking their cheeks. Police cars formed a flashing perimeter, but found no sign of struggle. No broken fence, no footprints distinct enough to follow. By 2 p.m., Detective Sharon Wexler stood at the edge of the field with her arms crossed, trying to steady her voice as she addressed the press. 3 girls, ages 8 and 9, are currently missing. We are investigating this as a potential abduction. We ask the public to remain calm and report any unusual activity or footage near the school vicinity. The media frenzy began before sundown. By nightfall, the town had changed. What they didn't know, not yet, was that the key to the case had been watching from the porch of a log cabin 2 miles away. His ears had twitched at the distant bark. Bruno didn't move. The German shepherd, streaked with grey and worn from years of service, sat motionless by the screen door as his owner filled the water trough. "You feel that?" Luke Hanley asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Bruno's head tilted, nostrils flaring. Luke froze. In the years since retirement, the old K9 had learned to relax, to nap long and not bother with birds. But this was different. The tension in Bruno's shoulders, the slow rise to his feet, the low guttural whine, not of pain but warning. Luke's phone buzzed on the railing. It was a text from his sister. "Carly didn't come back from recess. They think she's missing. Please, Luke." Luke looked down at Bruno. The dog's eyes didn't blink. They were locked on the tree line. "I'm coming," he muttered, not sure if he meant it for his sister or the dog beside him. Bruno was already at the truck, not barking, not pacing, just waiting, silent, focused. Luke grabbed his jacket, keys jangling, heart thudding too hard for a man who'd seen combat. On the ride into town, Bruno stayed tense in the passenger seat, not panting, not resting. The old dog's body was a coiled spring. As they reached the school, the sun dipped low. Police had blocked off the road. Parents clung to each other near the gate, Reporters buzzed like flies. Luke parked on the side and walked Bruno to the edge of the field. An officer moved to intercept them. "No, unauthorized! She's my niece!" Luke snapped. "And this dog used to track bomb makers in Kandahar. Let him try." The officer hesitated. Bruno stepped forward on his own, nose lowered to the grass. He circled once, twice, then stopped. A low rumble vibrated from his chest. Luke crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Bruno didn't move for a moment. Then slowly he backed up. Not out of fear. Something had made him recoil. Something deep in the ground. Luke reached down. His hand touched damp earth, soft, like it had been disturbed, and something colder than soil beneath it. He dug with his fingers, just a little, enough to find a pink cloth bow, dirt-smeared and clinging to a clump of hair. Bruno's ears pinned back. His body stiffened. Luke looked up. The woods behind the fence weren't just woods anymore. They were a crime scene. And somewhere in them, 3 little girls had vanished without a sound. But not without a trace. Not for Bruno. The moment Luke lifted the dirt-covered bow, a knot twisted deep in his gut. The hair tangled in it was unmistakably Carly's. Her dark brown curls were one of her mother's constant struggles every school morning. He turned to the patrol officer behind him, voice low and grave. "You need to get your forensics team here. Now." Bruno remained absolutely still, nose hovering just above the disturbed ground. His breathing was shallow, focused, controlled. Luke watched him the way only a former handler could. There was no agitation, no panic, just readiness. And something more, something Luke hadn't seen in years, the old drive. The officer scrambled to call in backup, but Luke wasn't waiting. He unlatched the leash from Bruno's collar. The dog took a slow step forward, then 2, weaving past the fence into the woods, head low, tail straight, ears sharp. "Let him lead," Luke called, pushing past the yellow tape with authority that no one dared challenge. Detective Sharon Wexler caught up with him near the trees. "You're Luke Hanley?" she asked, breath short from the sprint. "Yeah, Carly's uncle, retired handler. This is Bruno. We worked search and rescue ops after Hurricane Katrina, and he's not done yet." She hesitated, eyeing the greying shepherd who was already 20 feet ahead. "I can't officially authorize this," she said. "I'm not asking for paperwork." Luke replied, "We don't have time." Bruno stopped abruptly near a moss-covered stump. He sniffed the base, circled once, then looked up, not at Luke, but at the trees above. Luke followed the gaze. A yellow ribbon, barely visible, flapped from a low branch. It was the kind teachers tied to lunch pails during field trips. Luke pointed silently. Wexler cursed under her breath and radioed in a unit. The woods grew darker as they moved farther from the playground. The underbrush thickened. Thorns scratched at Luke's jeans, and branches snapped underfoot. But Bruno didn't slow. His paws moved with mechanical precision, weaving a path that only he understood. Every 10 yards he'd stop, sniff the air, then resume, adjusting angles as the scent shifted. They reached a small ravine, dry but treacherous. Bruno halted at the edge, ears twitching. Then he made a noise Luke hadn't heard in years. A low chuff. Not alarmed, curious. Luke climbed down after him, boots crunching dry leaves. Bruno had found something, a trail of gum wrappers. Colourful, innocent, but fresh. He picked one up. Grape flavour. Carly's favourite. He turned it over. The back was torn clean. No dirt, no moisture. Dropped recently. Bruno circled again, then bolted up the other side of the ravine and into a clearing. Luke and Wexler scrambled after him. The clearing was silent. Too silent. Bruno stopped dead center and stood still, head tilted slightly to the left. "What is it, boy?" Luke asked. Bruno barked, short, sharp. Luke approached carefully. There, wedged between two roots, was a doll, its face smeared with mud, one eye missing. Luke reached down and picked it up gently. He didn't need to ask. Tasha had carried that doll since she was 3. Bruno began to pace, nose high, not low. "What's he doing?" Wexler asked. "He's scent-checking the air. They stopped here. Saturday, maybe waited." "For what?" Luke didn't answer. His mind raced. Kids don't wait in the middle of the woods for no reason, unless someone told them to, or promised something. A candy bar, a puppy, a lie. "Let's widen the perimeter," Wexler said into her radio. But Bruno had already taken off again, deeper into the trees. They followed. 100 yards in, the terrain changed. A strange clearing with tire tracks. Old ones, but in the middle, new indentations, small shoes, 3 pairs, walking, together. And next to them, larger prints, boots, adult-sized. Luke crouched, studying them. Someone walked them in. He muttered. They weren't dragged. Wexler nodded grimly. That's not better. Suddenly, Bruno growled. A deep, warning growl from the far side of the clearing. Luke ran toward him. The dog stood rigid in front of a dead tree, eyes locked on a low pile of brush. "Don't move," Luke said. Bruno didn't. Luke reached into the brush and pulled out a flashlight, a small one, pink, stickers peeled, Mia's. But there was something else, tucked behind the roots. A phone, cracked, mud-stained, still blinking. Luke pressed the power button. To his shock, the lock screen lit up. A photo of the 3 girls, taken this morning, and a notification. One new voice message. Time, 12:11 p.m. Trembling, Luke hit play. The recording crackled, filled with wind noise. Then a voice. Tasha's, whispering. "Mum, we're with a man. He says we're going to the train tracks. Please come." The message cut off. Wexler paled. "We need to get K9 teams on the South Trail. The tracks are that way." But Luke shook his head. No. Bruno hadn't moved. He was staring at the opposite direction. The wind had changed, and he had picked up something else, a scent that shouldn't exist here. Gun oil. Luke turned to Wexler. "You've got a decoy trail." Bruno gave a low bark, then took off into the thickest part of the forest. This wasn't just an abduction anymore, it was something more calculated. And Bruno, the dog written off as too old, too tired, too forgotten, was already chasing what no one else could smell. The forest shifted. That was the only way Luke could describe it. One moment the trees stood still, brittle under the autumn wind. The next they seemed to part for Bruno, like even nature knew to step aside for him. Luke and Detective Wexler trailed the German shepherd deeper into the denser woods, where light barely pierced the pine canopy. Bruno didn't pause. His gait was sure, nose to the ground, tail level, body alert. A different kind of stillness took hold now, not silence, but anticipation. Luke could feel it in the soles of his boots. Whatever they were closing in on, it wasn't just footprints or candy wrappers. It was danger. Wexler whispered, "Why would they use gun oil? Trying to mask something?" Luke shook his head. "That scent doesn't belong out here unless someone wants it to be found. Bruno's ignoring it, which means it's planted. He's locked on something real." A shout crackled through Wexler's radio. "Units approaching the train tracks. Nothing found. Perimeter expanding." "Waste of time," Luke muttered. "They're chasing shadows." Suddenly Bruno stopped. His ears perked forward, eyes focused ahead. He stood statue still. Luke had seen that stance before. He drew his breath. "He's pointing." Wexler looked puzzled. "Pointing what?" "He's not just tracking anymore. He's found something. Or someone." Bruno let out a quiet whine, the kind that said close, but not yet. Luke stepped forward cautiously. They came upon a crumbling hunting shack, half swallowed by vines and rotting leaves. The roof had caved in on one side. Rusted tools littered the ground. It looked like it hadn't been touched in a decade, except for the footprints around it. Small ones. Barefoot. Wexler's breath caught. Kids? Luke motioned to the soft soil. They stopped here. Bruno circled the shack, his snout pressed close to the wood. Then he stopped at a low corner of the structure, where the earth had been disturbed. He pawed the ground. Once, twice. Then looked up at Luke. The message was clear. Dig. Luke knelt and began pulling aside the leaves and dirt. His hands brushed something hard. Metal. A trapdoor. They exchanged a glance. Wexler drew her firearm. Could be anything. Luke slowly lifted the rusted latch. It groaned as it opened, revealing a narrow crawl space beneath the shack. Dark. Damp. The air that rushed out smelled of mold, old wood, and something else. Fear. Bruno moved to the edge of the opening and sniffed hard. Then, without hesitation, he dropped down into the darkness. Wait! Wexler hissed. Luke followed him, crawling on his elbows. The space was tight and silent. His fingers felt along the ground. A candy wrapper, a crumpled piece of notebook paper. Then, near the far wall, fabric. He pulled it into the beam of his flashlight. A tiny pink jacket. Carly's. But no bodies, no blood. Luke exhaled. They were here, he said, but not anymore. Suddenly, Bruno let out a muffled bark. Luke turned sharply. The dog was sniffing at the wall. His paw scraped lightly against one panel. Then he sat, alert. What's he got? Wexler asked from above. Luke pressed his hand to the panel. A faint click. A hidden compartment opened in the wood. Inside, a burner phone and a small device with wires. Luke stared. A GPS jammer? He muttered. Wexler dropped into the hole beside him and examined the device. Why the hell would someone use this here? They didn't want the girls tracked. Not by phones, not by drones, not by anyone. Except maybe a dog they didn't expect. Bruno let out a sharp bark, echoing in the crawl space. Luke narrowed his eyes. Something else was bothering him. The items left behind weren't random. The jacket, the notebook scrap, the doll, the gum wrappers. They weren't just dropped in fear or haste. They were placed. We're not just following a trail, Luke said quietly. Someone's laying one, piece by piece. Wexler's eyes narrowed. Then why let the dog keep tracking? Luke swallowed hard. Because they want us to find something. Or someone else. They climbed back out. Bruno stood ready, nose twitching. But as he turned to resume the trail, a shot rang out in the woods. Not close, not far. A single crack, then silence. Bruno didn't flinch. He pivoted to the right, muscles tight, tail low and stiff. Luke's voice dropped. He's locked in. That shot came from the direction he was already headed. Wexler radioed for backup, but Luke didn't wait. Bruno was already moving, and Luke trusted that dog more than any GPS, drone, or squad car. He ran after him. 30 yards ahead, they reached a clearing marked with broken branches. And there, hanging from a tree branch with a string, a child's shoe. Clean. Untouched. Luke's chest tightened. Wexler arrived behind him, weapon out. What the hell is this? Luke didn't answer. He stared at Bruno, who had begun pacing in a tight circle, confused. The scent trail was splintered. This wasn't a simple abduction. This was a message. And someone knew exactly how to confuse even the best tracker. But Bruno stopped. His ears perked. Nose high. Then, without warning, he turned left, toward the opposite end of the trail, and bolted. Wexler raised her voice. Is he losing the scent? Luke didn't answer. His boots hit the dirt as he followed. Bruno wasn't chasing a trail anymore. He was chasing time, and they were already running out of it. Bruno was running ahead now, not recklessly but with fierce determination, his paws kicking up layers of dead leaves as he veered off the narrow dirt path into thick brush. Luke didn't even hesitate to follow. His legs burned with every step, lungs fighting against the cool mountain air, but Bruno never slowed. Whatever he was locked on, it was stronger than scent. It was instinct, muscle memory, something primal that never left a working dog even after the badge came off. Behind them, Detective Wexler kept pace as best she could. "Tell me again why we're not calling for more backup." "Because they're looking in the wrong direction," Luke shouted over his shoulder. "They're reacting. Bruno's thinking." Up ahead, Bruno skidded to a halt at an old service road, half reclaimed by grass and time. It hadn't been used in years. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a fallen log stretched across like a forgotten gate. But Bruno didn't hesitate. He jumped the log and kept going. Luke's boots thudded behind. "Why here?" "Wait," Wexler said, slowing as she spotted something by the side of the road. A smear. Faint. Pink. Candy-colored. She crouched and picked up a small piece of chewed gum, barely clinging to a flat rock. "Kids," she whispered. Luke looked around. Someone led them here, through this path. No way they just wandered. Wexler frowned. "This isn't a random abduction, is it?" "No," Luke said. "It's a route, one Bruno somehow remembered." They pushed forward. Trees arched above like cathedral rafters, blocking out most of the fading sun. The forest swallowed them whole. Every so often, Bruno would pause, nose twitching, then push forward again like he was rewinding time, playing back scents most. Noses would have lost to wind and age. Then they reached it. A dry creek bed, shallow but wide. A place that had seen rushing water in spring, but now lay bare, exposing jagged stones and tracks. Small tracks, 3 sets, all barefoot. Bruno circled the edge, then jumped down, pawing gently at the rocks. His head turned sharply to the left. Then he growled, a low, guttural warning that stopped both Luke and Wexler cold. "Easy, boy," Luke said softly. Wexler drew her weapon. "You hear that?" Voices, faint, male, just beyond the tree line. Bruno lowered his body to the stones, crawling forward with uncanny precision. Luke followed on instinct. They crept closer, ducking behind a thicket of overgrown blackberry bushes. Through the branches a clearing opened, and in it a small RV sat tucked under camo netting, its windows covered with blackout curtains. A generator sputtered nearby. Inside, someone was yelling. Bruno pressed low to the earth, nose raised, ears back. His body was a coil of tension. Wexler whispered, "How did we not know this was out here?" Luke didn't respond. His mind was spinning. The tracks, the timing, the misdirection, it was all designed to give law enforcement false leads. But Bruno cut through it all. Suddenly, from inside the RV, a child's scream pierced the air. Wexler's radio chirped. Too loud. Bruno barked once, sharp as a gunshot, and sprang from cover. "Bruno, wait!" Luke called, but it was too late. The shepherd barreled into the clearing, charging straight toward the RV. The door flung open. A man stepped out, startled, holding a phone in one hand and a stun baton in the other. Bruno lunged, teeth bared, and clamped down on the man's forearm before he could swing. The man shrieked, twisting, trying to shake Bruno loose. Luke and Wexler burst from the woods. "Drop the weapon!" Wexler yelled, aiming her sidearm. The man dropped the baton. Bruno let go on command, retreating 2 steps but staying low, still growling. Luke rushed to the RV door, flinging it wide. Inside were 2 of the missing girls, Lily and Carly, huddled in the corner, duct tape loose around their wrists, wide-eyed and pale, but alive. "Hey, you're okay," Luke said gently, kneeling. "You're safe now." They sobbed into his chest. "Where's Emma?" he asked softly. They pointed toward a back room, trembling. Luke stood and kicked in the flimsy interior door. Emma sat on a dirty mattress, hands bound, but awake. As soon as she saw Bruno behind Luke, she cried out, "The dog! I saw him in my dream!" Luke untied her and carried her out. As Wexler cuffed the suspect, more sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was finally arriving. Bruno trotted beside Luke, tongue out, panting but alert. "You good, buddy?" Luke asked, placing a hand on his head. Bruno licked his fingers. "You found them," Wexler whispered, awe in her voice. "No," Luke corrected, eyes on the dog. He did. All of them. The three girls clung to each other, crying now that it was over. Bruno stood just a foot away, quiet and calm, his dark eyes watching them, like he had known them all along, like he'd never stopped being a protector, even after retirement. The relief at finding the girls should have been overwhelming, but Luke's gut said otherwise. They were safe, yes. But something felt unfinished. The girls had been found too fast, too clean. The man they apprehended barely fought back. Bruno, despite being in full pursuit mode minutes earlier, was now unnaturally still, as if the air itself had gone flat. Wexler crouched beside the girls, offering sips of water from her bottle. "Do you remember his name?" she asked gently. Emma nodded. "He said we'd only be here for a little while." "Did he hurt you?" Wexler asked. "No," Carly whispered. "He said someone would come get us soon, but we had to stay quiet." Lily looked up. "He was scared. He kept looking at his phone. He said the boss was coming." Luke exchanged a glance with Wexler. He wasn't working alone. Bruno stood by the RV's open door, sniffing upward. His tail was stiff, his head tilted toward the air vent near the ceiling. Luke followed the gaze, then climbed into the RV again. He opened the small vent and reached in. His fingers brushed plastic. He pulled it out. A burner phone, its screen still lit. One last message was on display. "Confirm drop." 30 minutes. 30 minutes until what? Wexler asked, reading over his shoulder. Luke's jaw tensed. Someone else was supposed to pick the girls up? This guy? He was just the middleman? Bruno growled suddenly, deep and low. Luke turned. The dog had shifted toward the woods again, body tight, ears forward. He wasn't done. "Something's coming?" Luke muttered. Wexler stepped out of the RV. "Should we wait for SWAT?" Luke shook his head. "By the time they get here, whoever's behind this could be long gone, or worse, already watching." Bruno gave a short, deliberate bark and took off along the tree line, not running wild, but leading with precise focus. Luke followed instantly. Wexler hesitated only a second, then radioed for a second unit to watch the RV and followed. They crossed into thick woods, roots rising like knotted veins beneath their boots. A scent trail, so faint no human would have caught it, pulled Bruno forward. Then he stopped. Not at a clearing, not at a trail, but at a row of tires. Fresh ones. Impressions in the dirt. Luke crouched beside them. Someone parked here, recently. Next to the tread marks, a crushed cigarette still smoked faintly. Bruno sniffed the tire grooves, then moved sideways, until he found something else. A used latex glove, buried halfway under leaves. "Someone waited here," Luke said. "They never planned to go into the RV. They were going to stay out of sight and pick the girls up once the drop was complete. Which means they were watching," Wexler added. "Maybe even saw us take the guy down." Bruno suddenly stopped moving. He froze like a statue, his nose lifted high into the air. Then, very slowly, he turned his head. Not towards the woods. Upper. Luke's breath caught. "What is it, buddy?" Bruno let out a single, warning bark, pointed like a shot. They looked up. Hidden in the tree canopy, just barely visible through the fading light, was a drone. Wexler raised her weapon. "Don't shoot. Not yet." Luke pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. "Surveillance grade, infrared camera. This wasn't some hobby toy. Someone's watching our every move." The drone buzzed, tilted, and vanished above the trees. Bruno chased the sound to the clearing edge but stopped short, pacing in circles. "He doesn't chase blindly," Luke said, half to himself. "He waits, calculates." Wexler pulled out her tablet and sent the drone image to HQ. "This thing wasn't cheap. Military grade or better." "Then whoever we're up against," Luke said, "knew exactly what kind of dog we had on this case." Bruno moved back toward them, his body calm now, but his eyes sharp. He stood between them and the direction the drone disappeared, as if shielding them. "That's not just loyalty," Wexler said quietly. "That's tactical thinking." Luke nodded. He's done this before, in cities, war zones, maybe even worse. The sun dipped behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the trees. Luke reached down and scratched behind Bruno's ear. "We're not dealing with a drifter who lost control. This was a plan, a precise handoff, and someone out there just realized they underestimated a retired dog." Bruno sat, straight-backed and still, but his ears stayed perked, because the hunt wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning broke grey and tense, with a sharp chill that didn't match the season. Luke paced the edge of the school parking lot, staring at the tire marks again. Bruno sat near the base of a maple tree, eyes fixed in the direction of the drone's last flight. Luke checked his watch. Wexler should have returned from the sheriff's office 20 minutes ago. Just then, her SUV pulled up fast, brakes crunching gravel. She stepped out, clutching a manila folder. "You were right. The guy in the RV isn't just some creep. His name's Sean Donnelly, record sealed after a plea deal. Used to do minor delivery gigs, cash only, untraceable. But this isn't his kind of job." She handed over the folder. Inside, a photo of Donnelly and a much older man, grainy surveillance from a bus station. Luke squinted. "That guy. I know him. Or, I've seen him before. Iraq, private contractor." Wexler nodded grimly. "Retired military-turned-freelance at consultant. Uses different aliases, but always shows up when there's dirty money and high-risk assets." Luke looked toward Bruno. "And we just found out he was part of a system." A chain Wexler leaned against the hood. "We traced the drone's registration. Fake paperwork, of course, but the chipset, defense contractor level. Same stuff used in border surveillance. That's not a toy." Bruno's ears flicked. A low huff escaped him, his head suddenly turning. "Hold up," Luke said. "He's got something." Bruno trotted toward the chain-link fence at the far end of the lot, where the school bordered an unused maintenance road. Luke followed, heart picking up. Bruno stopped beside a narrow metal grate, sniffed hard, then let out a sharp bark. Wexler caught up. "Storm drain?" Luke knelt. Number too narrow for the girls, but maybe for a drop. He pulled the grate loose with effort, the rust grinding like a warning. Inside, under a stack of broken PVC and a rotting tarp, sat a small black case. He opened it slowly. Inside, 5 tightly packed phones, each labeled with a different name. Luke read the tags. MIA, Rachel, Bell. The missing girls. His voice tightened. These phones were meant to go to someone else, whoever was supposed to pick them up. Bruno suddenly lunged to the right, growling, not out of fear, but precision. Across the road, a utility van had just turned the corner, windows tinted, no license plate on the back. Wexler's eyes narrowed. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Luke gave one nod. They moved fast, cutting across the fence line and through a cluster of bushes. Bruno moved like lightning, Low, fast, no wasted motion. The van hesitated at the stop sign ahead. Then it sped up. Too late. Wexler muttered. "No." Luke said, "Watch him." As the van accelerated, Bruno burst from the cover of the woods and raced alongside it. Not barking, not reckless. Targeted. The driver made the mistake of glancing left. Bruno leapt, teeth clamping into the side mirror, using the force to swing himself onto the running board. The van jerked, screeched, and crashed into a wooden fence, splinters flying. Wexler reached the driver first, weapon drawn. "Out! Hands where I can see them!" The man inside wasn't old, maybe late 20s. Eyes wide, face pale, lips trembling. Inside the passenger footwell were 2 more burner phones and a GPS device with coordinates still blinking. Luke glanced at the map. It led not to a city, not even a town. It ended in a dead zone 2 counties over. "Bruno," he called, voice low but firm. The dog dropped from the van, unharmed, tail stiff but high. Luke gave a tight nod of respect. "You weren't chasing. You were steering him." The driver was cuffed and in the back of Wexler's SUV within minutes, muttering something about "just a runner" and "I don't know who funds it." But the GPS had spoken louder. Luke pointed to the route. "That's a transport site. Abandoned ag station. Used to move cattle. Now, nobody's watched it in years." Wexler started the engine. Time to change that. Bruno jumped into the back seat like he'd known the plan all along. As they sped toward the coordinates, Wexler glanced into the rearview mirror. "He's not just a dog, you know." Luke didn't turn. "Number, he's a partner. And right now, he's ahead of all of us." The dirt road stretched long and empty, framed by brittle grass and broken fences. The coordinates from the GPS had led them far beyond the suburbs, deep into a part of the county where even locals rarely went. Abandoned signs leaned into the wind. No cell towers, no surveillance, just silence. The van they had tailed earlier hadn't lied. The place existed. But it wasn't just an old agricultural depot. It was built like a compound. Luke cut the truck's engine and scanned the property. A weathered barn stood at the center, its doors chained shut. A battered trailer sat nearby with blackout curtains drawn across the windows. Cameras dangled from the corners, most pointed down, inactive. But the setup was too clean to be coincidence. "This wasn't just used once," Wexler said from the passenger seat. "It's been operational for a while." Luke reached for his gear. "Let's move quiet. Bruno leads." The old shepherd stepped out of the back like a soldier stepping into familiar terrain. His posture dropped into a low stalk. His nose worked the air, then the earth. They passed through a break in the fence, staying in the shadows. Bruno led them not to the trailer, but around the barn, and that's when Luke heard it. A soft noise. Barely there, scratching. Bruno stopped and looked back. One paw hovered mid-step, signaling a trace. Wexler knelt beside the barn's outer wall. "There's something inside." Luke pressed his ear to the wood. A breath, a small one, then a cough. Not an adult. Luke stood quickly. "We need to breach." They found a rusted side door, half buried behind old pallets. Bruno pawed it once, then backed up. Luke took the cue, braced, and slammed his shoulder into it. The frame groaned and splintered. Inside, the air hit like a wet cloth, stale and damp. The barn's interior was empty at first glance. Then they spotted the false floor, a metal trap door partially covered in straw. Luke pulled it open. The smell grew stronger. Unwashed bodies, fear, and something sharp. A girl's voice rose faintly. "Hello?" Luke dropped to one knee. "It's okay. We're here to help. Are you Rachel? Or Belle? Or Mia?" Silence. Then a gasp. "I'm Belle." Wexler handed down a flashlight. Luke descended quickly into the crawl space, Bruno right behind him. There, in a cramped holding area, were the three girls, pale, dehydrated, their wrists bound loosely with zip ties. But they were alive. Belle blinked hard. "Are you real?" Bruno stepped forward gently and pressed his head into her lap. Belle let out a sob and hugged him tight. Luke's voice cracked. "You're safe now." Wexler called for medical immediately. The girls were pulled up one by one, blankets wrapped around them. Bruno stayed by Belle until the paramedics arrived, refusing to leave her side. But the victory was short-lived. Wexler's phone buzzed. She read the screen and her face shifted. "What?" Luke asked. She showed him the text from the sheriff's office. "Donnelly's dead, found in his holding cell, supposedly hung himself, but the cameras were malfunctioning." Luke stared at the barn's empty corners. "This goes higher than we thought." Bruno suddenly barked once, sharp, focused. He ran out of the barn, nose to the ground, body rigid. Luke followed. They reached the back field where tire tracks led toward a nearby tree line. A second vehicle had been there recently. Wexler caught up. "Someone was here, maybe watching the whole time." Luke clenched his jaw. "And they left once we opened the hatch." Bruno stopped at a patch of gravel where a cigarette butt lay smouldering. Luke picked it up with gloved fingers. It was fresh. "They knew we were coming," he said quietly, "and they wanted us to find the girls." Wexler's brow furrowed. "Why?" Luke looked back toward the barn. The girls, the chained doors, the GPS, the bait. "To cover a bigger move," he said. "We were led here." Bruno didn't bark again. He just stood still, watching the distant trees. And in that silence, they all felt it. The case wasn't over. It had just widened. The girls were safe. That should have been the end. But Luke couldn't shake the feeling. This wasn't just a one-off kidnapping. This was organized, cold, precise. And someone out there wanted them to see just enough. But not everything. Back at the sheriff's station, chaos filled the air. The press hovered outside, demanding answers. Meanwhile, inside the break room turned incident HQ, Luke laid out the only pieces they had left on the table. A burner phone found in the barn, a USB stick planted in Belle's coat pocket, and the note tucked in her shoe. "You're not done. Keep digging." Wexler sat across from him, eyebrows tight, arms crossed. They planned this, anticipated Bruno. Luke nodded. "They knew we'd bring him, and they left us a trail for a reason." He turned the USB stick over in his fingers. But this wasn't meant for just anyone. When they plugged it in, the screen filled with lines of encrypted code. GPS coordinates, blurred images, snippets of audio. All partial, messy. But it wasn't random. Bruno was lying by the corner, head down, breathing steady, until a high-pitched frequency from one of the audio files made his ears perk up. His whole body stiffened. Luke froze the screen. "Wait, run that back." Wexler replayed the 5-second clip. It was faint, static and garbled, but within it a command. "Delta 5, track position. Hold perimeter." Bruno stood and walked to the screen, tail slightly raised. He let out a low, deliberate chuff. Luke blinked. That was his old unit's call sign. The files weren't just from any operation. They were Bruno's, or rather his final classified mission before retirement. Wexler slowly sat down, stunned. "You think this has something to do with him?" Luke nodded. "Not just something. Everything." The barn hadn't been just a holding site. It had been repurposed from a government training facility years ago. Some of the materials they found, steel beams, fencing, even the compound's lock system, matched old procurement orders from Bruno's last deployment. Someone was using old assets, someone who had access, and someone who wanted Bruno back in the game. Luke and Wexler met with Captain Mallory, Bruno's former handler now stationed at Quantico. When she saw the footage, her face fell. "I told them to destroy all the archives," she said, "after the operation went sideways." "What operation?" Luke asked. Mallory leaned forward, her voice low. "Bruno wasn't just a patrol dog. He was trained for black ops, deep extraction, human tracking in hostile zones." "Like kids?" Wexler asked. Mallory nodded. "Exactly like that." She tapped the map. "There was one mission, one we weren't supposed to talk about, a pipeline through South America, trafficking routes hidden by a security contractor who later got dissolved. Bruno helped rescue 13 hostages." Luke pointed to the encrypted audio. "This is from that mission, isn't it?" "It was," she said, "and someone has pulled pieces of it out, re-edited it, and embedded them in this file." Luke leaned back. "To send a message." Mallory looked at Bruno. "To him." That night, Luke took Bruno out for a walk behind the sheriff's department. It wasn't just to clear his head. He needed answers, even if they came in the form of instinct. They reached the edge of the woods. Bruno stopped, looked up, and then walked off the path. Not random, deliberate. Luke followed him deeper into the trees until they reached a small creek. Bruno paused at a fallen log and sniffed. Then, with his paw, scraped away layers of dirt. Luke crouched. There, buried beneath twigs and mud, was a steel dog tag. Not Bruno's, another K9 unit, name Zane, Unit D5, status MIA. Luke's breath caught. "How long has this been here?" Bruno whined softly, nuzzling the tag with care. Luke's thoughts raced. The dog they thought had vanished on that last mission, Zane, might not be gone. He might be alive. Or worse, used. The abduction of the girls wasn't about ransom or leverage. It was about testing the old team. And Bruno had passed. Luke whispered. "They're reactivating ghosts." Behind him, Bruno's eyes stayed locked on the tree line, where something or someone moved just out of sight. A shadow. A watcher. But this time, they didn't run. Whoever it was, they wanted to be seen. Luke stepped forward. The shadow slipped back into the trees. But before disappearing, they dropped something in the grass. Another tag. Bruno retrieved it carefully. This one read, "Target, Phase 2. Asset. Bruno status. Confirmed." Luke stared at the tag, the pieces snapping into place faster than he could speak. They weren't after the girls. They were after Bruno. And now? Phase 2 had begun. The map was never meant to be complete. It was partial by design, just enough to lure, just enough to warn. Luke stood with the makeshift map spread across the hood of his patrol vehicle, headlights casting long shadows behind him. Wexler leaned in, chewing the edge of a pen cap. Mallory stood back, silent, watching Bruno. Bruno wasn't pacing. He was focused, alert, nose to the wind, ears slightly tilted. "They moved her," Bruno's body said, even before Luke looked up. Not her, them. The last audio embedded in the second dog tag hadn't been a message. It was a location, not a known address, but a sequence, tied to old satellite frequencies from the South American operation. Luke traced the coordinates to a long-defunct Cold War fallout shelter beneath Fairview Ridge, half collapsed during an earthquake in the late 80s. Sealed, forgotten, until now. "We're going down there?" Wexler asked, eyeing the dirt path. Luke didn't answer. Bruno was already walking. The entrance was hidden under the rotting floorboards of an old ranger station. Someone had cleared just enough. By hand. No tools. Quiet work. The opening was small, a crawl space into pitch blackness. Luke clicked on his headlamp. Wexler followed, shotgun slung tight across his chest. Mallory remained topside, comms in hand. Bruno waited for Luke to enter first, then slid in behind him, tail low, body coiled like a spring. The air was musty, soaked in mold and old concrete. The passage dipped, then widened into a narrow tunnel. They could stand. Barely. Bruno surged ahead, his paws silent even on wet rock. 10 minutes in, they hit the first fork. Then another. None of it was marked. But Bruno knew. He sniffed, paused, and turned left. Luke followed, then stopped. A humming noise. Not electrical, mechanical, software like a generator muffled behind layers of earth. Then came the bark. Sharp, controlled. It was Bruno's alert bark. Not panic, not danger. Movement. Luke whispered. He's tracking something moving. Bruno surged forward and came to a dead stop at a sealed steel door, rusted old military surplus, a fingerprint scanner long dead beside it. But the door wasn't locked. Inside was a long room lined with surveillance monitors, still active, flickering in grainy black and white. Faces, hallways, a schoolyard, and the girls. Luke's heart slammed. Is this live? He touched the screen. It glitched, then steadied. Number not live. Wexler muttered. Recorded. Look at the timestamp. 2 days ago. They were watching the school. Planning. Luke moved to the next monitor. A slow pan of the barn. Then the yard. Then Bruno. Footage from earlier that morning. They've been watching us, Luke said. Wexler shook his head. They've been watching him. Bruno stepped to a far corner and sniffed aggressively. His hackles rose. Luke followed him, brushing aside an old tarp. A dog crate. Not for transport, for containment. Blood stains inside, and in the corner a collar, black, reinforced, military issue. Tag, Zane. Status, terminated. Luke touched it like it might burn him. Bruno growled low. Not at the collar, at the hallway behind them. Footsteps, 3 figures, not local. Tactical boots, dark clothing, faces masked. Back now, Luke ordered. Out. Wexler covered their 6 while Luke and Bruno led the retreat. But one of the figures spoke. We weren't here for the girls. They didn't follow, just stood there in the shadows. Then who? Luke demanded. You know who, he's not done. Bruno's body stiffened. He didn't bark. He stared. Straight into the darkness. Recognition. Then, just before Luke pulled him out, a second voice, familiar, broken, echoed down the hallway. A single word. Bruno. Luke froze. That voice. He turned, but the hallway was empty, and Bruno's ears dropped low. Not in fear, in grief. Zane. He was alive. Or something that used to be. The tunnel behind them echoed shut like a closing chapter. But the story wasn't over. Whoever was down there had plans, not just for revenge, but for activation. Phase 2 wasn't a test, it was a resurrection. Dawn cracked like a slow promise over the hills of Shady Creek. The barn where the girls had once been held was now a crime scene, its wood soaked with the weight of days and desperation. But they were safe now, shaken, clinging to their mothers in blankets, sipping juice from little boxes handed out by volunteers. Bruno sat nearby, chest heaving softly, ears still alert despite the exhaustion dripping from every muscle. He hadn't slept in nearly 36 hours. Neither had Luke. Mallory walked up with a clipboard. Her face was tight, eyes shadowed. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up a document. "What now?" Luke asked, half dreading the answer. She flipped the page. Zane, decommissioned 2 years ago, listed as deceased after a training accident in Honduras. Body unrecovered. Luke let the words settle. They felt too neat, too final. "There's no body because they never lost him," he said. "He was reprogrammed, broken down and built back. But that voice? That wasn't just programming." Bruno looked up at the word Zane. His eyes didn't flinch. Not fear, not rage, recognition. Luke crouched beside him and laid a hand on the scruff of his neck. You were trained to track the last scent, the final step. But this isn't over, is it, buddy? Bruno lowered his head, just slightly. It was his way of saying no. The FBI had taken over the investigation, locking up the barn, the tunnels, and whatever. Intel had been pulled from the surveillance room. But what they couldn't take was the knowledge that something bigger was moving beneath the surface. The three girls had been bait. For what, no one fully knew. Yet it was clear now. This wasn't about ransom. It was about leverage. Field testing. A comeback of ghosts from a war the public had long forgotten. Back at Luke's truck, the girls' parents stood in a huddle, whispering thanks. One by one, they walked up to Bruno, hands trembling. And Bruno, despite the trauma and tension lingering in his bones, let each child place their hand on his head. First Sophie, then Hazel, then June. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just closed his eyes. Luke turned away, fighting the pull in his chest. Mallory joined him, arms crossed. He shouldn't go back out, Luke. He's done more than any dog should. He deserves rest. I know, Luke said, watching the girls laugh softly for the first time since they were taken. But you and I both know that if I put my boots on again, Bruno's already waiting at the door. A light breeze caught the air, and for just a second, everything felt still. Honest. Real. Later that night, as Luke sat on his porch with a beer in hand and Bruno at his feet, he checked the old police scanner. Just static. Peaceful. Then a new frequency clicked through. Scrambled at first, but unmistakable. It was Zane's voice again. Phase 2 complete. Next target already watching. Luke sat bolt upright. Bruno growled low, his head turning slowly toward the dark woods beyond the yard. Luke whispered, Guess retirement's gonna have to wait. Bruno didn't bark. He stood, ready. Because for dogs like him, loyalty didn't retire, it remembered. And it returned. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own bond with a loyal companion, hit that like button and share it with someone who understands. Subscribe to German Shepherd for more real feel stories where heroes wear fur and leave paw prints on our hearts. What's your story with a loyal pet? Tell us in the comments.